I'll never forget the look on Nathan's face that day in the courtroom. Pure shock, followed by disbelief, then that slow dawning horror as he realized what had happened. "This can't be right," he stammered, looking frantically between his lawyer and the judge. But it was right. The mansion he thought he'd cleverly stolen from me, our family home of 15 years, was legally mine again. And not just the house, but everything in it. All because of 7 carefully crafted sentences his grandfather had written into a family trust decades ago that Nathan never bothered to read. 7 sentences that changed everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember exactly what I was doing when my world collapsed. I was in our home library, the room I'd spent 3 years restoring to its original Victorian glory, carefully cataloging a collection of first editions Nathan had purchased at auction. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the antique Persian rug. Everything seemed so perfect, so permanent. Then Nathan walked in, his footsteps unusually heavy on the hardwood floors. I looked up, expecting his usual distracted smile, but instead found his face set in an expression I'd never seen before. Cold determination mixed with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "I've filed for divorce, Olivia," he said, his voice eerily calm. "My lawyer will be contacting yours." He placed a thick manila envelope on the mahogany desk between us. "Though I doubt you have one on retainer." I felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. 15 years of marriage, and he delivered this news with the same tone he used to order coffee. "What? Nathan, where is this coming from? We can talk about—" "There's nothing to discuss," he cut me off, checking his watch. "I'm late for a meeting." "Oh, and you should know, the house is going on the market next week. My realtor thinks we can get $8 million for it, even in this market." $8 million? But this is our home, Nathan. Ethan's home. You can't just— Actually, I can. Check the deed. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "It's solely in my name. Always has been. You were so busy choosing paint colors and restoring this ridiculous library that you never bothered to look at the paperwork." The room started to spin slightly. "What about Ethan? He's 14. His whole life is here, his school, his friends." "Ethan will adapt. Kids are resilient. Besides, with the private school tuition I pay, he'll be fine wherever he goes." Nathan straightened his already perfect tie. "You have 2 weeks to find a place. I've been more than generous." As he turned to leave, I found my voice again. "Why? Why now, after all these years?" He paused at the doorway, not bothering to turn around. "Riverdale Heights is developing the old waterfront property. It's going to be the biggest project in Connecticut this decade. I need a fresh start to match my new position as lead developer." He glanced back, his expression almost pitying. "You were perfect for the Nathan Mitchell who was climbing the ladder. But I've reached the top now, Olivia. I need someone who fits that world." The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. I sat frozen, the afternoon sun still streaming in as if nothing had changed, while my entire life crumbled around me. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually, I heard the front door open and close, followed by Ethan's backpack hitting the floor in the hallway. "Mom, I'm home. Did you see my history test grade? Mrs. Patterson said my essay on local architecture was the best in the class." His voice jolted me back to reality. Our son, my brilliant, sensitive boy with Nathan's analytical mind and my eye for design, was about to have his world shattered too. I quickly wiped my eyes and tried to compose myself. Ethan didn't deserve to see me fall apart, not when he would need me to be strong. "In the library, honey," I called out, hoping my voice sounded normal. "That's wonderful news." When Ethan appeared in the doorway, his smile immediately dropped. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Despite my best efforts, I couldn't hide the truth from him. Ethan had always been perceptive, too observant for his own good sometimes. "Sit down, sweetie. We need to talk about some changes that are happening." I tried to soften the blow, to explain that sometimes adults grow apart, that it wasn't his fault, all the things parenting books tell you to say. But Ethan's face grew increasingly stony as I spoke. "It's because of Adrienne Caldwell, isn't it?" he said finally, his voice flat. The name hit me like a physical blow. Adrienne Caldwell was the marketing director at Mitchell Development, a woman I'd met at several company functions, tall, polished, with an MBA from Wharton and connections to every important family in New England. "What do you mean, honey?" "Dad's been meeting her for dinner. I saw them last month when I was at Blake's house downtown. They didn't see me." Ethan looked down at his hands. I thought maybe it was just business, but they were holding hands under the table. The second shock of the day left me speechless. My son had been carrying this knowledge alone, protecting me from a truth I should have seen myself. "And now we have to leave our house because of her?" Ethan continued, his voice rising. "Where are we supposed to go? What about my school? My friends?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, hating the uncertainty in my voice. "But we'll figure it out together, okay? I promise." Ethan looked around the library, at the built-in bookshelves I'd restored by hand, the reading nook where he'd spent countless hours doing homework, or losing himself in fantasy novels. "Dad can't just take our home. That's not fair." "Life isn't always fair, sweetheart," I said, the platitude tasting bitter on my tongue. "Then make it fair," Ethan said, his eyes suddenly fierce. "You always tell me that if something isn't right, I should do something about it. So do something, Mom." His words stayed with me that night as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Nathan and I had shared for 15 years. Do something. But what could I do? Nathan had built his career on property law and development deals. He knew every loophole, every advantage. I was an interior designer who'd given up my career to support his, to raise our son, to transform this house into a showplace that impressed his clients and partners. The next morning, with Ethan off to school, I forced myself to open the manila envelope Nathan had left. Inside were divorce papers already drawn up, with post-it notes helpfully marking where I should sign. An attached document outlined Nathan's generous offer, a one-time payment of $200,000 plus $3,000 monthly in child support until Ethan turned 18. Nothing about alimony, nothing about the house or any of our other assets. I felt physically ill. The $200,000 wouldn't even buy a decent condo in Riverdale Heights, where property values had skyrocketed thanks largely to Nathan's own development projects. And $3,000 a month barely covered Ethan's school tuition and activities. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and called the only person I could think of who might help, my college roommate, Charlotte Winters. Charlie had gone to law school, while I'd studied design and now worked for a corporate firm in New York. We didn't talk as often as we should, but she'd always been fiercely loyal. "Olivia? This is a surprise. Everything okay?" Charlie's voice was distracted, the background noise suggesting she was at her office. "Not really," I admitted, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay composed. "Nathan's filed for divorce. He wants me out of the house in 2 weeks. I have nowhere to go, Charlie." There was a pause, then the background noise faded as a door closed. "Tell me everything," she said, her tone shifting from distracted to focused in an instant. I explained the situation, including the terms Nathan was offering. By the time I finished, Charlie was cursing under her breath. "That sneaky bastard. Okay, first thing, do not sign anything, not a single page. Second, I'm not a family law expert, but I know people who are. I'll make some calls. I can't afford a big legal team, Charlie. I have some savings, but we'll figure that out later, she cut me off. Right now, you need to gather information. Do you have access to your financial accounts, tax returns, property documents? I realized with a sinking feeling that I didn't know where most of those documents were. Nathan had always handled our finances, insisting it was easier since he understood the legal language. I'm not sure, I admitted. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Nathan keeps most of that in his home office. Then that's your first mission. While you're still in the house, you need to find and copy everything you can. Bank statements, investment accounts, property deeds, tax returns. Go back at least 5 years if possible. His office is always locked when he's not home. Find the key, Olivia. Or pick the lock if you have to. This is your future we're talking about, and Ethan's too. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen island, Charlie's, words echoing in my mind. I'd never snooped through Nathan's things before. It felt wrong, invasive. But then I remembered his cold eyes as he'd informed me our home would be sold, as if the 15 years we'd spent building a life here meant nothing. That afternoon, while Nathan was at work, I searched for the key to his office. It wasn't on the key hook in the kitchen or in his bedside drawer. I was about to give up when I remembered Nathan sometimes emptied his pockets onto the small antique table in our dressing room. Sure enough, beneath his spare change and business cards was a small silver key. Nathan's office was immaculate, as always. The large mahogany desk held only his laptop, which was password protected, a legal pad with indecipherable notes, and a framed photo of Ethan from his middle school graduation. It hurt to see that photo, evidence that Nathan did care about our son, even if he'd decided we were disposable. The filing cabinets were organized alphabetically, each folder neatly labeled. I pulled out everything related to our house, our finances, Nathan's business holdings. There were so many documents, all filled with legal terminology that made my head swim. But I dutifully used the office scanner to copy everything, saving the files to a USB drive Charlie had suggested I purchase. In the bottom drawer, beneath folders of tax returns, I found a thick blue binder labeled Mitchell Family Trust. I vaguely remembered Nathan mentioning a trust his grandfather had established, but he'd never shared the details. I added it to my scanning pile. As I replaced the folders exactly as I'd found them, I noticed something odd. There were recent mortgage documents for our home, which should have been paid off years ago, according to Nathan. I scanned those too, a knot forming in my stomach. Just as I finished, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. Running late. Don't wait for dinner. Meeting with Westport investors tonight? Or meeting with Adrienne Caldwell, I thought bitterly. But the text was actually a relief. It meant I had more time to cover my tracks. I carefully locked the office door and returned, the key to the dressing room table. That night, after Ethan went to bed, I examined what I'd found. The mortgage documents revealed that Nathan had taken out a second mortgage on our home 6 months ago for $1.5 million. Where had that money gone? It hadn't been deposited in our joint account, which rarely held more than enough to cover household expenses. I also discovered that Nathan had created several new LLCs in the past year, all with variations of waterfront holdings in their names. The Riverdale Heights waterfront project he'd mentioned must be even bigger than he'd implied. The Mitchell family trust documents were the most confusing, page after page of legal language about asset distribution and succession rights. Nathan's grandfather had apparently been quite wealthy and very specific about how his assets should be managed. I saved these for Charlie to examine. The next day, while Ethan was at school and Nathan at work, Rebecca, Nathan's sister, arrived unannounced. She'd always been cool toward me, viewing me as somehow not good enough for her brother despite, or perhaps because of, our similar backgrounds. Unlike Nathan, she'd never tried to hide her humble origins, but she also never missed an opportunity to remind me of mine. "Nathan asked me to drop off some boxes," she said, not bothering with a greeting as she walked past me into the foyer. "For your packing." "How thoughtful," I replied, trying to keep the sarcasm from my voice. Rebecca deposited the flattened, moving boxes against the wall and then looked around with undisguised calculation. "I've always loved this entryway. Those balusters on the staircase, they're original to the house, aren't they?" "Yes. I restored them myself, actually. The previous owners had painted over the mahogany." She nodded absently. "Nathan mentioned, you might need a place to stay temporarily. I have that guest room over the garage. It would be fine for a few weeks while you get situated." The offer was clearly not made from kindness, but I was in no position to refuse. "Thank you, Rebecca. Ethan and I appreciate it." "Yes, well," she adjusted her designer handbag on her shoulder, "Nathan's always been too generous for his own good. I told him he should have had you sign a prenup. All this," she gestured around the entryway, "it's always been Nathan's achievement, not yours. You just decorated." I felt a flash of anger but swallowed it down. "Is there anything else Nathan asked you to tell me? Or are the insults complimentary?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Just be out when Nathan says, and don't take anything that isn't personally yours. I have an inventory of the valuable items in this house." After she left, I stood in the entryway, looking up at the grand staircase with its meticulously restored balusters. Each one had taken hours of careful stripping, sanding, and refinishing. I'd researched historical restoration techniques, worked with local craftsmen to learn the proper methods. This house wasn't just where we lived. It represented years of my life, my work, my vision. And now I was being told to leave it all behind, with nothing but some cardboard boxes and a room over Rebecca's garage to show for 15 years of marriage. That evening, Charlie called back. "I've found you a lawyer," she said without preamble. "Eleanor Davis. She's semi-retired now, but she was one of the best divorce attorneys in Connecticut, specialized in high-net-worth cases with complicated assets." "Charlie, I can't afford—" "Just meet with her," Charlie interrupted. "She's agreed to an initial consultation as a favor to me. We worked on a pro bono project together last year." I agreed, and the next day, I drove to a small, elegant office in downtown Stamford. Eleanor Davis was not what I expected. In her mid-70s, with silver hair in a neat bob and keen blue eyes behind stylish glasses, she looked more like a chic grandmother than a cutthroat attorney. "So," she said after I'd explained my situation, "Nathan thinks he can walk away with everything because the house is in his name and you've been a homemaker. Classic mistake on his part." "Mistake?" I asked, confused. "Connecticut is an equitable distribution state, my dear. The court doesn't care whose name is on the deed. What matters is what's fair, given the length of your marriage and your contributions, including non-financial ones like raising your son and improving the property." For the first time since Nathan had dropped his bombshell, I felt a glimmer of hope. "So I'm entitled to something?" "You're entitled to quite a lot, potentially. 15 years is a long marriage. You've contributed significantly to the value of your home through your restoration work. And if Nathan's been commingling funds between his business and personal accounts, that could work in our favor too." She flipped through the documents I'd brought, her expression sharpening when she came to the Mitchell Family Trust. "Now, this is interesting. Very interesting indeed." "What is it?" Eleanor adjusted her glasses. "This trust has some unusual provisions about property succession. Most family trusts are straightforward. Assets passed to children, then grandchildren, and so on. But this one—" She trailed off, reading more carefully. "Did you know that your home was purchased partly with funds from this trust?" I shook my head. Nathan never shared those details. He just said his grandfather helped him get started in real estate. Well, his grandfather did more than that. He created a trust with very specific rules about how properties acquired with trust Funds could be transferred. And one of those rules, she tapped a paragraph with her manicured fingernail, states that any residential property purchased for family use cannot be sold or transferred without the consent of all family members residing in the property for at least 10 years. What does that mean exactly? Eleanor smiled, and for the first time, I glimpsed the formidable attorney she must have been in her prime. It means, my dear, that Nathan cannot legally sell your home without your consent and Ethan's. At least not without violating the terms of his grandfather's trust, which would have significant financial consequences for him. I felt lightheaded. So, we don't have to leave? Not immediately, no. And this gives us leverage, significant leverage, in negotiating your divorce. Settlement. Eleanor closed the folder decisively. I'm going to take your case, Olivia. My fee will be contingent on what we recover. I haven't had this much fun in years. As I drove home, my mind was racing. The house that Nathan thought was his alone, that he could sell out from under us, might actually be protected by his own grandfather's foresight. The irony was almost too perfect. But my momentary triumph faded as I pulled into our driveway and saw Nathan's car already there, hours earlier than usual. Something was wrong. I found him in the library, of all places, rifling through the desk drawers. He looked up when I entered, his expression thunderous. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where are what?" "The trust documents. I know you took them from my office." I felt a chill. How did he know I'd been in his office? Had I left something out of place? "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb, Olivia. Rebecca saw the scanner was warm when she dropped off those boxes yesterday. You've been snooping through my files." He slammed the drawer shut. "It doesn't matter. Those documents won't help you. The house is in my name, and you're going to sign these." He pointed to the divorce papers on the desk. "Or things will get very unpleasant." I thought of what Eleanor had told me about the trust provisions, about my rights under Connecticut law. But something in Nathan's expression made me hesitate to reveal what I knew. Instead, I said, "I need more time to review everything, and to find a place for Ethan and me." "You don't need to review anything. It's all standard. And Rebecca's offered you her guest room, which is more than generous considering you'll be getting $200,000. His tone made it clear he thought this was an enormous sum. "Nathan, that's barely enough for a down payment on a small condo in this area. And what about Ethan? He deserves stability." "Ethan will be fine. Kids adjust." Nathan straightened. His tie, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. "I want those trust documents back, Olivia. They're family papers, not yours." "I didn't take any documents from your office," I said, which was technically true. I'd only taken copies. Nathan studied my face, then seemed to accept my answer. "Fine, but my offer stands for 3 more days. After that, it decreases by 10,000 for every day you delay. Sign the papers, take the money, and we can all move on with our lives." After he left, I called Eleanor and told her about Nathan's ultimatum. "He's bluffing," she said confidently. "That's not how divorce settlements work, and he knows it. He's trying to pressure you because he's realized you might have more leverage than he thought." "What should I do?" "Stall. Tell him you're considering his offer but need more time. Meanwhile, I'll file our own divorce petition with the court, including a temporary order preventing him from selling the house or removing you from it. And I'll look more closely at this trust. There may be even more protections in there than I initially thought." I ended the call feeling slightly more confident. But as I looked around the library, my favorite room in the house, the place where I'd spent countless hours creating something beautiful, I couldn't help wondering if I was fighting a losing battle. Nathan had always gotten what he wanted. Always. He had the money, the connections, the legal knowledge. What did I have? Just then, Ethan came into the library, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Dad was here?" "I saw his car leaving." "Yes, just briefly," I said, trying to sound casual. Ethan dropped his backpack and sat in the window seat, looking out at the garden I'd designed, with its heritage roses just coming into bloom. "Are we really going to lose our house, Mom?" I sat beside him, putting my arm around his shoulders. He was at that age where he sometimes shrugged off my hugs, but today he leaned into me. "I'm going to fight for it," I told him. "I can't promise what will happen, but I'm not giving up." "Good," he said firmly, "because I found something I think you should see." Ethan reached into his backpack and pulled out a leather-bound book I didn't recognize. "What's this?" I was doing research for my history project on local architecture, and I found this at the Historical Society. It's about Grandfather Mitchell's property developments in Connecticut. There's a whole chapter about our house. I opened the book, surprised to find a detailed history of our home, complete with black and white photographs from the early 1900s. According to the text, the house had been built by a prominent local judge and had later fallen into disrepair before being purchased by Nathan's grandfather in the 1960s. "Look at this part," Ethan said, flipping to a page he'd marked, "about how the house was supposed to always stay in the family." The passage described how Harold Mitchell, Nathan's grandfather, had lovingly restored the property with the intention that it would remain a family home for generations. He was quoted as saying, "Some buildings are just structures, but others are legacies. This house is meant to shelter Mitchells for 100 years to come." "That's lovely, Ethan, but I'm not sure it helps us legally." "But don't you see? It matches what's in the trust. Dad told me about it once, how his grandfather left money in a trust that had all these rules about keeping properties in the family. He said it was old-fashioned, but that his grandfather was obsessed with family legacy." I stared at my son, amazed once again by his perceptiveness. "Ethan, you're brilliant. This could be important evidence if we need to prove the intent behind the trust provisions." He smiled, looking pleased but also sad. "I don't want to lose our house, Mom, and I don't want to live with Aunt Rebecca. She always looks at me like I'm doing something wrong." "I know, honey." I hugged him tighter. "We're going to fight this together, I promise." As Ethan headed upstairs to start his homework, I sat in the fading light of the library, the historical book open on my lap. Nathan's grandfather had created both a legal document, the trust, and a public statement about his intentions for this house. Together, they might be enough to protect our home. For the first time since Nathan had delivered his bombshell, I allowed myself to truly hope. This fight wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing insistently. It was Eleanor Davis, calling far earlier than seemed reasonable. "Olivia, turn on your local news, Channel 8. "Right. Now?" Confused and still half asleep, I fumbled for the remote and switched on the bedroom television. There, standing in front of a dilapidated waterfront warehouse, was Nathan. He was smiling his most photogenic smile, the one I used to tease him about practicing in the mirror as he gestured expansively at the rundown buildings behind him. "This historic waterfront district will be transformed into Riverdale's premier luxury living and shopping destination," he was saying to a reporter who nodded enthusiastically. "Mitchell Development Group is proud to announce that construction begins next month on the marina at Riverdale Heights." The camera panned to show architectural renderings of gleaming glass towers, upscale boutiques, and yacht-filled marinas. A complete reinvention of the industrial waterfront. "What am I looking at?" I asked Eleanor, though I was beginning to understand. "You're looking at why Nathan suddenly wants a divorce and needs to sell your house," she replied. "That project is enormous, easily $100 million in development costs before they see a penny of profit. And guess who's personally guaranteeing a significant portion of the financing?" "Nathan," I breathed, the pieces falling into place. "Exactly. I have a contact at the county clerk's office who pulled the financing documents this morning. Nathan's leveraged everything for this deal, including taking out that second mortgage on your home. He needs to sell the house to cover his portion, of the initial development costs. My mind raced. But if what you said about the trust is true, that he can't sell without our consent, then his entire financing plan falls apart, Eleanor finished. Which is why he's so desperate to get you to sign those divorce papers quickly and move out. Once you're out of the house, it would be much harder to enforce the occupancy provisions of the trust. The news segment continued, with Nathan now, shaking hands with the mayor and other local officials. Everyone looked delighted with the arrangement. No doubt property values throughout Riverdale would soar once the waterfront development was complete. "What's our next move?" I asked, watching my husband bask in the adulation of the press and local politicians. "We file our counter-petition today, including an emergency motion to prevent any sale of the house, and we need to dive deeper into that trust. The language about family occupancy is unusual. There may be more provisions we can use." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, still watching the news coverage. The reporter was now interviewing Adrian Caldwell, marketing director for Mitchell Development Group, who was explaining the thoughtfully curated retail experience the new development would offer. She was everything I wasn't: tall, sleek, articulate in business jargon, dressed in a power suit that probably cost more than my monthly credit card limit. I forced myself to turn off the TV. Comparing myself to Adrian wouldn't help me save our home. I needed to focus on what I could control, and right now, that meant learning everything possible about Harold Mitchell's family trust. Downstairs, I found Ethan already dressed for school, making himself breakfast. He looked up as I entered the kitchen. "I saw Dad on the news," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The waterfront project looks huge." "It is huge. Apparently, it's also why he's in such a rush to sell our house." Ethan nodded, absorbing this information with a maturity that made my heart ache. "So what are we going to do?" "Fight," I said, simply. "My lawyer thinks the family trust might give us legal grounds to stop the sale." "Good." Ethan pushed a bowl of cereal toward me. "You should eat something. You barely touched dinner last night." I smiled at the role reversal, my son taking care of me instead of the other way around. I sat down and took a spoonful of cereal, more to please him than from actual hunger. "I have debate team after school," Ethan said, gathering his backpack. "But I was thinking, maybe I could stop by the library on the way home. Look for more information about great-grandfather Harold and the trust?" "That would be wonderful. But don't you have enough on your plate with school and everything else going on?" Ethan's expression hardened slightly. "Dad is trying to kick us out of our home. I think that takes priority over my biology homework." I couldn't argue with that logic. "Just be home by dinner, okay?" After dropping Ethan at school, I headed to the Mercer Design Group office in downtown Stamford. Although I hadn't worked professionally in years, I maintained a friendship with Sophia Mercer, who had started her interior design firm around the same time I'd stepped back to focus on family. I'd occasionally helped her with projects when she needed an extra eye or hand, but never for pay. Now I was hoping she might have more substantial work for me. Sophia's office was housed in a converted, industrial loft, all exposed brick and ductwork, with modern furnishings and enormous windows overlooking the city. When I arrived, she was in the middle of a client presentation, but her assistant showed me to a small conference room to wait. 20 minutes later, Sophia burst in, her curly hair escaping from a messy bun, arms full of fabric samples. "Olivia! It's been too long." She dumped the samples on the table and hugged me tightly. "What brings you downtown? Finally ready to rejoin the world of the gainfully employed?" "Something like that," I said, attempting a smile. Sophia's expression changed as she took a closer look at me. "What's wrong? You look terrible. And I mean that with love." I hadn't planned to break down in Sophia's conference room, but something about her direct concern cracked my carefully maintained composure. Through tears, I explained my situation: Nathan's sudden divorce announcement, the waterfront development, the trust complications, everything. Sophia listened without interrupting, occasionally passing me tissues from a box on the conference table, and when I finished, she sat back in her chair, her expression thunderous. "That absolute jackass," she said finally. "After everything you've done for him? The networking parties you've hosted, the client relationships you've nurtured, not to mention turning that mausoleum of a house into a showcase that's been featured in 3 design magazines?" I hadn't expected such vehemence from Sophia, who'd always been polite about Nathan when we'd met socially. "You never liked him, did you?" "I never trusted him," Sophia corrected. "There's a difference. Too smooth, too calculated. Always looking over your shoulder at parties to see if someone more important had arrived." She leaned forward, eyes intense. "So what do you need from me? A job? If you have any work available, even part-time. I need to start building my own income. Eleanor, my lawyer, thinks we can prevent Nathan from selling the house, but I'll still need to support myself and Ethan." Sophia didn't hesitate. "I've been looking for someone to help with residential consultations. The commercial work has really taken off, but I hate to turn away the smaller residential jobs. You could start with those, build your portfolio back up, and we'd split the fees 70-30 until you get established again." The offer was more generous than I'd expected. "Are you sure? It's been years since I worked professionally." "Please. I've seen what you did with your own house. That library renovation alone would get you hired anywhere." She pulled out her calendar. "Can you start Monday? I have a client in New Canaan who's renovating a mid-century modern house and needs help integrating some family antiques without it looking like a museum." We spent the next hour working out details, and by the time I left, I had a contract, a pending consultation, and a small advance that Sophia insisted on giving me for professional wardrobe updates. Her kindness almost made me break down again. "None of that," she said firmly when she saw my expression. "Save the tears for when you crush Nathan in court. Oh, and you're coming to dinner at my place this weekend. The kids can hang out, and you can meet my brother Jeffrey. He's a financial advisor, might have some insights about trusts and investments." I started to protest that I wasn't ready to meet anyone new, but Sophia waved me off. "It's not a setup, it's a strategy session. You need a team, Olivia. Nathan has his, and now you're building yours." Driving home, I felt a growing sense of purpose. I had Eleanor working on the legal front, Sophia offering professional opportunities, and potentially a financial advisor to help me understand the more complex aspects of our situation. For the first time since Nathan dropped his bombshell, I didn't feel completely alone. That feeling strengthened when I arrived home to find Ethan already there, surrounded by books and printouts at the dining room table. "You're home early," I said, surprised. "What happened to debate team?" "I told Coach Peterson I had a family emergency." Ethan looked slightly guilty. "It's not really a lie, is it?" "I suppose not. What's all this?" Ethan gestured to his research. "Materials. I went to the Historical Society and asked about great-grandfather Harold. The librarian there knew him, Mrs. Whitman. She's really old but super sharp. She helped him catalog his papers when he donated them to the society." My eyebrows shot up. Harold Mitchell donated his papers? Like personal documents? "Business stuff mostly," she said. But she remembered him talking about the family trust because it was unusual. She helped me find some newspaper articles about him, too. Ethan pushed several photocopies toward me. The yellowed newspaper clippings featured a stern-looking man with Nathan's prominent chin and calculating eyes. One headline read, "Mitchell saves historic Watson mansion from demolition," with a photo of Harold standing proudly in front of what was now our home. I skimmed the article, which described how Harold Mitchell had stepped in when developers wanted to tear down the historic property to build apartments. He'd purchased the mansion and restored it, establishing a trust to ensure it would remain, standing for generations. His own father lost their family home during the Depression, Ethan explained, pointing to another article. That's why he was so obsessed with preserving properties and keeping them in the family. He didn't want what happened to his dad to happen to future Mitchells. "This is gold, Ethan," I said, amazed at his initiative. "Eleanor needs to see these. Right away." "There's more," Ethan said, lowering his voice even though we were alone in the house. "Mrs. Whitman said great-grandfather Harold had a falling out with his son, Grandpa William, over some business deal gone wrong. She thinks that's why the trust has so many restrictions. He didn't fully trust his own son to preserve the family legacy." That tracked with what I knew of Nathan's grandfather. He'd been an imposing figure, already elderly when Nathan and I married, but still sharp as a tack and deeply opinionated about how the family properties should be managed. Nathan had chafed under his grandfather's controlling nature but had never directly challenged him, not while the old man controlled the family purse strings. "Mrs. Whitman also said I should talk to Great-Uncle Edward," Ethan continued. "Apparently, he's the trustee now that great-grandfather is gone." I stared at my son in shock. "Edward Mitchell is the trustee? Nathan's uncle?" "Yeah. Do you know him?" "I've met him a few times at family events. He lives in Boston, keeps mostly to himself." I tried to recall what I knew about Edward Mitchell. He was Harold's younger son, William's brother, who had chosen academia over the family real estate business. Nathan rarely mentioned him except to occasionally mock his impractical professorial nature. If he's the trustee, he would have the legal authority to enforce the trust provisions, I said, thinking aloud. Nathan would need his approval for any major transactions involving trust assets. So if Uncle Edward doesn't want our house sold, then it can't be sold legally, I finished, a plan already forming in my mind. "Ethan, you're a genius." My son smiled, looking pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "I just asked questions. Mrs. Whitman did most of the work. Still, this gives us another avenue to explore." I gathered up the articles. "I'm going to scan these and send them to Eleanor right away." As I headed to the home office, Ethan called after me. "Mom, there's one more thing Mrs. Whitman mentioned. She said great-grandfather Harold had a special provision for female descendants in the trust. Something about making sure the Mitchell women were always protected, even if they didn't carry the Mitchell name." I paused, turning slowly. "Did she know what the provision said specifically?" Ethan shook his head. "Just that it existed. She thought it had something to do with his sister or mother losing property during a divorce way back when." Another piece of the puzzle. Harold Mitchell had clearly been concerned about protecting family assets across generations, including from divorce settlements. But which way would that cut? Would it protect me as the mother of a Mitchell heir, or protect the property from me as an outsider to the bloodline? Eleanor was cautiously optimistic when I called her with Ethan's discoveries. "This gives us more to work with," she said. "The newspaper articles establish Harold's intentions for the property, which strengthens our interpretation of the trust language. And if Edward Mitchell is the trustee, we definitely need to speak with him." "Do you think he'll talk to us?" "He's still Nathan's uncle. Family dynamics can be complicated in these situations. Just because Edward and Nathan are related doesn't mean they see eye to eye on how the trust should be managed. It's worth reaching out." I agreed to let Eleanor make the initial contact with Edward Mitchell, to keep things on a formal legal footing. Meanwhile, I would continue preparing for my first design consultation with Sophia's client on Monday. It felt strange to be thinking about color palettes and furniture layouts while my life was in such turmoil, but it was also grounding. A reminder that I had skills and value beyond being Nathan's wife. The weekend arrived, bringing with it a new complication. Nathan had apparently discovered I was researching the family trust and was not pleased. He arrived Saturday morning unannounced, his normally perfect appearance slightly rumpled as if he'd dressed in a hurry. "We need to talk," he said, brushing past me into the foyer. Alone. Ethan was upstairs in his room, likely still sleeping after our late night of research and planning. "He's not up yet," I said, keeping my voice low. We can talk in the kitchen. Nathan followed me, his movements stiff with barely contained anger. When we reached the kitchen, he didn't sit down, but instead paced in front of the island counter where we'd shared countless family breakfasts. My lawyer tells me you've filed a counter petition, he began without preamble, and requested an emergency order preventing the sale of the house. That's right, I confirmed, keeping my tone neutral as I started the coffee maker. If we were going to have this confrontation, I needed caffeine. Do you have any idea what you're doing? Nathan's voice rose slightly before he caught himself and lowered it again. This project is everything, Olivia. Years of work, millions in investment. I can't have it derailed because you're feeling sentimental about this house. Sentimental? I repeated, anger flaring. This isn't about sentiment, Nathan. This is our home. Ethan's home. You can't just decide unilaterally to sell it out from under us because it's convenient for your business. It's not just convenient, it's essential. The financing depends on liquidity that I don't have without selling this property. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration from a man who prided himself on always appearing composed. Look, I'll increase the settlement offer, $300,000 instead of $2 million. That's more than fair. The coffee maker beeped, and I poured myself a cup, deliberately not offering one to Nathan. It's not about the money, it's about the fact that you don't have the right to sell this house without our consent. Not according to your grandfather's trust. Nathan's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face before he masked it. The trust is irrelevant. The house is in my name. Is that what your lawyer told you? Because mine says differently. The trust explicitly states that residential properties purchased for family use cannot be sold without the consent of family members who have resided there for at least 10 years. That's me and Ethan. That's a misinterpretation, Nathan said, dismissively, but I could tell he was rattled. The provision was meant to protect against forced sales by creditors, not to restrict normal transactions. Is that so? Then why did your grandfather give interviews about preserving the Watson mansion, our house, as a family legacy for generations? We have the newspaper articles, Nathan. Your grandfather's intentions were clear. Nathan stared at me momentarily, speechless. I'd never challenged him like this before, never stood my ground against his confident legal assertions. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The work felt refreshingly normal, focusing on practical solutions rather than legal battles and trust provisions. The clients seemed pleased with my suggestions for reimagining some pieces and strategically placing others, and by the end of the 2-hour consultation, they'd signed a contract for my services over the next 3 months. It wasn't a huge project, but it was a start. My first independent income in years. I drove directly from New Canaan to a small cafe in Stamford where we were meeting Edward Mitchell. Eleanor was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with an elderly gentleman who bore a striking resemblance to the newspaper photos of Harold Mitchell. Olivia, meet Professor Edward Mitchell, Eleanor said as I approached. Edward, this is Olivia Mitchell, Ethan's mother. The old man stood to greet me, his movements deliberate but not frail. He was tall and thin, with the same prominent Mitchell chin as Nathan, but his eyes were kinder, more thoughtful. Olivia, he said warmly, taking my hand. It's been far too long. The last time I saw you must have been at Harold's funeral. What, 8 years ago? Yes, I think so, I admitted, trying to recall our brief interaction. Thank you for agreeing. To meet with us? Of course. Family matters require attention, especially when they involve the Watson mansion. Please, sit. As we settled into our chairs, a server appeared with a pot of tea and 3 cups. Edward poured with the precise movements of someone who had performed this ritual countless times. I understand my nephew is planning to sell the house, he began without preamble, to finance his waterfront development project. Yes, I confirmed. He claims he has the right to do so because the deed is in his name. But from what we've found in the trust documents, that may not be the case. Edward nodded, stirring his tea thoughtfully. Nathan has always had a selective interpretation of my father's intentions. The trust was designed specifically to prevent exactly this type of situation, sacrificing family stability for business ambition. Then you agree that Nathan can't sell the house without consent? Eleanor asked. Not only do I agree, I have the authority as trustee to prevent it. Edward set down his spoon with a soft clink. My father was very clear about the Watson mansion. It was to remain a family home for Mitchells across generations, not a financial asset to be liquidated whenever convenient. Relief washed over. Nathan seemed confident the trust wouldn't be an obstacle. Edward smiled slightly. Nathan has always operated under the assumption that I'm disinterested in family business matters. It's an assumption I've found convenient to let him maintain over the years. He took a sip of tea. But my father appointed me trustee for a reason. I may not share his business acumen, but I do share his values about family and legacy. So, what happens now? I asked. Now, Edward said, setting down his cup, I exercise my authority as trustee to block any sale of the property without proper consent from all qualifying family members, which includes you and Ethan, as residents, of over 10 years. Eleanor leaned forward. There's something else we discovered in our research. Apparently, Harold included special provisions regarding female descendants or family members. Do you know what those entail? Edward's eyes twinkled. Ah, yes. My father was ahead of his time in many ways. He had seen too many women in his era left destitute after divorces, including his own sister. The Mitchell women provision, as he called it, states that any female member of the family by marriage who has resided in a trust property for more than 10 years and has borne Mitchell heirs is entitled to lifetime residence rights, regardless of marital status. I stared at him, stunned. Lifetime residence rights? Even after divorce? Yes. The provision was specifically designed to prevent a Mitchell man from displacing his wife and children from the family home, even if the marriage ended. Edward looked almost amused. My father believed strongly in responsibility toward family, even when relationships failed. Nathan knows about this provision, or should know, if he's read the trust documents thoroughly. This changes everything, Eleanor said, making notes rapidly. With lifetime residence rights, Olivia has an incredibly strong position in the divorce negotiations. Edward nodded. Indeed, but there's more. He reached into his leather briefcase and withdrew a folder. When Eleanor contacted me, I reviewed the history of the Watson Mansion's purchase. The property was acquired using a combination of trust funds and personal funds from Nathan. However, the trust contribution was significant, nearly 60% of the purchase price. Why does that matter? I asked, struggling to keep up with the legal implications. Because, Edward explained patiently, properties purchased predominantly with trust funds remain trust assets, regardless of whose name appears on the deed. The trust maintains what we call beneficial ownership, with the named owner serving essentially as a trustee for that specific property. Eleanor's eyes widened as she grasped the implication. So Nathan doesn't actually own the house outright, even though his name is on the deed. Precisely. He holds legal title, but the trust maintains equitable ownership. He cannot sell without trustee approval, my approval, and I have a fiduciary duty to manage trust assets according to my father's explicit intentions. Edward passed the folder to Eleanor. These documents confirm the source of funds for the purchase. I've had my personal attorney review everything. The house cannot be sold without my consent, which I am not inclined to give under the current circumstances. I felt lightheaded with relief and surprise. All this time, Nathan had been proceeding as if he had complete control over our home, when legally, his authority was far more limited than he'd let on. Does Nathan know you've reached this conclusion? I asked. Not yet. I thought it best to To speak with you first, given that you and Ethan would be most affected by any property transaction. Edward sipped his tea contemplatively. I suspect Nathan is counting on my continued disinterest in family business matters. He's in for quite a surprise. As our meeting concluded, Edward insisted on walking us to our cars. Before we parted, he took my hand in both of his. Olivia, I want you to know that regardless of what happens between you and Nathan, you will always have a place in the Mitchell family. My father would have been appalled at how Nathan has handled this situation. His kindness nearly undid me after weeks of stress and uncertainty. Thank you, Edward. That means more than you know. Family is family, he said simply, even when some members forget what that means. Driving home, I called Sophia to update her on the meeting with Edward. He was incredible, I told her. So dignified, but so clear about where he stands. This is huge, Olivia. Nathan must be absolutely livid that his uncle is stepping in. He doesn't know yet, I admitted. Edward wants to review everything with his attorney before formally intervening. But it sounds like Nathan legally can't sell the house, and I may have lifetime residence rights regardless of the divorce. Oh, to be a fly on the wall when Nathan finds out, Sophia said with undisguised glee. How did your consultation go this morning? Really well. They signed a 3-month contract. It's not huge, but it's a start. It's more than a start. It's a statement. You're reclaiming your professional identity while fighting for your home. I'm so proud of you. Her words warmed me. A week ago, I'd been shattered by Nathan's betrayal, feeling helpless and alone. Now I had allies, professional prospects, and legal leverage I hadn't known existed. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt like I might not just survive this divorce. I might emerge stronger than before. When I arrived home, Ethan was waiting eagerly for news about the meeting with his great-uncle. I recounted everything, watching his expression shift from anxiety to relief to satisfaction as I explained Edward's position on the house and the trust. So Dad can't sell our home? He confirmed. No matter what. Not without Edward's approval as trustee, which he's not willing to give. And apparently, I have lifetime residence rights through the Mitchell Women provision. Ethan grinned. Great-grandfather Harold is coming through for us from beyond the grave. That night, as I lay in bed reviewing the extraordinary developments of the day, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. We need to talk. Tomorrow. My office. 2 p.m. The message was typical Nathan, commanding, not asking. But for once, I didn't feel intimidated. I had Edward Mitchell, Eleanor Davis, and the full weight of Harold Mitchell's carefully crafted trust behind me. Nathan wasn't the only one with legal protection now. I texted back a simple response. I'll be there. The Mitchell Development. Group headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass tower in downtown Hartford, a building Nathan himself had developed 5 years earlier. As I stepped into the marble-floored lobby, I felt underdressed despite having chosen my most professional outfit, a navy suit I'd purchased for a charity gala last year. The receptionist's eyes flicked over me, taking in my lack of designer accessories before directing me to the executive elevator. Mr. Mitchell is expecting you, she said, her tone making it clear this was unusual. Nathan typically kept his personal and professional lives strictly separated, until Adrian Caldwell had blurred that line. The executive floor was hushed, the thick carpeting absorbing any sound as I made my way past glass-walled offices where serious-looking people hunched over computers or spoke in low tones on phones. Several glanced up as I passed, curiosity evident in their expressions. I wondered if they knew who I was, if office gossip had reached them about Nathan's impending divorce. Nathan's assistant, a rail-thin young man with meticulous hair, looked up as I approached his desk. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, standing quickly. Mr. Mitchell asked not to be disturbed, but he's expecting you. Please go right in. I nodded my thanks, steeling myself before opening the heavy door to Nathan's corner. Office, The space was exactly as I remembered from my few previous visits, minimalist and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city. Nathan stood with his back to the door, gazing out at the skyline, a position I suspected was deliberately choreographed for maximum effect. "You're 5 minutes late," he said without turning around. "Traffic," I replied simply, refusing to apologize. I remained standing near the door, unwilling to sit unless invited. This was his territory, but I wouldn't act like a supplicant. Nathan finally turned, his expression carefully neutral as he assessed me. "You met with Uncle Edward?" It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, he was very helpful in clarifying the trust provisions regarding the Watson mansion." "I'm sure he was." Nathan gestured to the sleek leather chairs positioned across from his desk. "Sit, please. This might take a while." I took a seat, keeping my posture straight, hands folded in my lap. Nathan remained standing a moment longer, another power play, before settling into his ergonomic chair. "I've spoken with Edward this morning," Nathan continued, his tone measured. "He seems to have developed a sudden interest in family business matters after decades of academic seclusion. Perhaps he's always been interested, but felt no need to intervene until now." Nathan's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible sign that my comment had struck a nerve. "Edward has a romanticized view of my grandfather's intentions for the trust. The provisions he's citing were meant for a different era, when women had fewer legal protections. They're outdated and unnecessarily restrictive in today's business environment." "That's one interpretation," I acknowledged. "But legally, what matters is what the trust actually says, not how convenient its provisions are for your current business plans." A flicker of surprise crossed Nathan's face. Evidently, he wasn't accustomed to me sounding so knowledgeable about legal matters. He recovered quickly, leaning forward across his desk. "Let me be clear, Olivia. The waterfront project is happening with or without the proceeds from selling the house. I've worked too hard, invested too much to let this opportunity slip away. But the process would be much smoother for everyone involved if we could reach a reasonable agreement." "I'm listening." Nathan slid a document across the desk. "A revised settlement offer, $500,000, plus 40% of the net proceeds from the house sale. You and Ethan can stay in the house for up to 6 months while you find a suitable alternative. I'll cover Ethan's tuition and expenses through college, including graduate school if he chooses that path." I glanced at the document without touching it. "And in exchange? You sign a waiver of any claims to residence rights under the trust. You agree not to contest the sale of the house, and you instruct your lawyer to withdraw the emergency motion currently preventing me from moving forward with potential buyers." The offer was substantially better than his previous ones, a clear indication that our meeting with Edward had rattled him. But I wasn't going to be bought off so easily, not now that I understood the strength of my position. "Nathan, do you remember when we first saw the Watson mansion? That open house 12 years ago?" He frowned at the apparent non sequitur. "Vaguely. What does that have to do with anything?" "You were hesitant because of the extensive renovations needed. The real estate agent kept emphasizing the property's potential, but all you saw were dollar signs adding up. Do you remember what I said that changed your mind?" Nathan's expression remained blank. "I said this house had a soul, that beneath the peeling wallpaper and outdated fixtures was a home that had sheltered generations, that had stories embedded in its walls. I promised to restore it room by room, to honor its history while making it ours." I leaned forward slightly. And I did exactly that. For 12 years, I poured myself into that house, researching period-appropriate renovations, working with artisans to restore original features, creating a home that honored both its past and our present. "I appreciate your sentimental attachment." "It's not about sentiment," I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. "It's about value that I added through my work. The house is worth at least $2 million more now than when we purchased it, largely due to my renovation efforts. That's not sentiment, that's equity. Nathan's expression hardened. You were my wife. Improving our home was expected, not some professional service deserving of compensation. And there it is, I said quietly. The truth behind the charming facade. My work, my expertise, my years of effort, all just wifely duties in your eyes. Not real contributions worthy of respect or fair division. We stared at each other across the desk, the distance between us suddenly seeming much greater than a few feet of polished cherry wood. What do you want, Olivia? Nathan finally asked, his voice tight with controlled frustration. I want to keep our home, the home I've spent a third of my life restoring. I want Ethan to have stability during his crucial high school years. I want recognition of my contributions to our marriage, both as Ethan's mother and as the person who created the showcase home that's helped you impress clients and secure deals for years. Keeping the house isn't practical. You can't afford the upkeep on your own. That's no longer your concern. I've resumed my design career, and I have several promising projects lined up. This was stretching the truth somewhat. I had one confirmed, client and a couple of potential leads through Sophia, but Nathan didn't need to know the details. Nathan's eyes narrowed fractionally. With Sophia Mercer? She mentioned you'd been in touch when I saw her at the Chamber of Commerce meeting last week. The casual mention of Sophia caught me off guard. Had she revealed our conversation to Nathan? But then I remembered. Nathan sat on the Chamber's Economic Development Committee. He would naturally cross paths with other business owners at meetings. Yes, I'm working with Sophia. My first client is already under contract, with more in discussion. I lifted my chin slightly. I don't need your approval or your charity, Nathan. And thanks to your grandfather's foresight, I don't need your permission to remain in our home either. Nathan's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. This is ridiculous. I built that house. You bought that house, I corrected. With trust funds, apparently, which means it was never entirely yours to begin with. I built it into a home, room by room, year by year. He stood abruptly, pacing behind his desk. You have no idea what you're up against, Olivia. I have resources, connections, and I have the law on my side, and Edward, and the clear, written intentions of Harold Mitchell, who apparently anticipated exactly this type of situation when he drafted the trust provisions. Nathan stopped pacing, his expression calculating. When he spoke again, his voice had regained its usual controlled cadence. Let's be practical for a moment. Even if you could legally prevent the sale, which my lawyers still dispute, what about Ethan? Have you considered how this fight will affect him? Divorce is hard enough on children without becoming a drawn-out legal battle. Don't you dare use Ethan as leverage, I said, hearing the steel in my own voice. Not when you were perfectly willing to uproot him from his home with 2 weeks' notice. Not when you've missed half his school events this year because you were too busy with your precious waterfront project, or with Adrienne Caldwell. The mention of Adrienne clearly struck a nerve. Nathan's jaw tightened, and a dull flush crept up his neck. My personal relationships are not relevant to these negotiations. Aren't they? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you decided to trade in your family for a shinier model that better fits your new status. New project, new woman, new life. And Ethan and I were just inconvenient loose ends to be tied up as quickly and quietly as possible. Nathan planted his hands on the desk, leaning forward. That's enough. I've been more than generous with my offers. If you insist on making this difficult, you'll leave me no choice but to fight this through the courts. And trust me, Olivia, that's not a battle you want. I stood, gathering my purse, suddenly tired of the power games. Actually, I think it's exactly the battle I want. Because unlike you, I've actually read the trust documents now. I've spoken with the trustee, and I know that Harold Mitchell was determined to protect family homes from being sacrificed for business opportunities, precisely what you're trying to do. My grandfather was a stubborn old man with outdated ideas about family and property. The trust was created in a different era, and yet it remains legally binding. I moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing, Nathan. Ethan knows about Adrienne. He saw you with her months ago. He's been carrying that knowledge alone, protecting me from the truth while you pretended everything was fine. That's the kind of son we raised, loyal, compassionate, and far more mature than his father. I left without waiting for his response, closing the door quietly behind me. Nathan's assistant looked up, clearly trying to gauge how the meeting had gone from my expression. I gave him a polite nod as I passed, maintaining my composure until I reached the elevator. Once inside, with the doors closed, I leaned against the wall and exhaled deeply. My hands were shaking slightly, confronting Nathan in his own territory. Had required more courage than I'd realized. But I'd done it. I'd stood my ground, refused his settlement offer, and made it clear I wouldn't be intimidated or bought off. As the elevator descended, I checked my phone and found a text from Sophia. Battle report expected ASAP. Coffee at my office after? I smiled, grateful for her support, and texted back. On my way. Sophia's office was a welcome contrast to Nathan's sleek corporate environment. The creative disorder, the fabric samples and material boards, the staff chatting animatedly about design challenges. It felt alive and authentic. Sophia waved me into her private office, closing the door and immediately pouring coffee from a French press on her desk. So, how did it go? Did you destroy him with the trust revelations? I need details. I accepted the coffee gratefully. I wouldn't say I destroyed him, but I definitely caught him off guard. He tried to pressure me with a slightly improved offer, but still nowhere near fair considering my contributions to the property value. And you told him to shove it? In more polite terms, yes. I recounted the meeting, including Nathan's, thinly veiled threats about a court battle. Sophia snorted. Classic Nathan. When charm fails, resort to intimidation. As if you haven't seen that playbook for 15 years. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. So what's next? Eleanor is filing additional motions based on what we learned from Edward. She thinks we may be able to get the divorce proceedings moved to a more specialized family court that handles complex asset cases. Meanwhile, I need to focus on building my client base so I can demonstrate financial independence. Speaking of which, Sophia said, brightening, I've got another potential client for you. Penthouse in Stamford, art collector with expensive taste but no idea how to display his collection. Right up your alley. Sophia? That's amazing. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He's notoriously picky. But when I mentioned you'd restored a historic mansion and had an eye for integrating period pieces with modern elements, he was intrigued. She reached across her desk, squeezing my hand. You're going to get through this, Olivia, and you're going to come out stronger on the other side. Her confidence bolstered mine, but driving home, doubts began to creep in. Nathan had virtually unlimited resources for a legal battle. What if Edward's interpretation of the trust provisions was challenged? What if my fledgling design career couldn't generate enough income to maintain the house long term? And most worrying of all, what if this fight took an emotional toll on Ethan that I couldn't protect him from? I was still wrestling with these thoughts when I pulled into our driveway and noticed an unfamiliar silver Mercedes parked in front of the house. For a moment, I thought Nathan might have come directly from our meeting to continue the confrontation. But as I approached, I saw the vanity license plate. A Caldwell. Adrienne Caldwell was at my house. For a moment, I considered driving away. The last thing I needed today was a face-to-face encounter with Nathan's girlfriend. But this was my home, the home I was fighting to keep, and I refused to be driven away from my own doorstep. I parked and walked purposefully to the front door, keys in hand. As I approached, the door opened, and Ethan appeared, his expression a mixture of alarm and embarrassment. "Mom," he said quickly, stepping outside and pulling the door nearly closed behind him. "I didn't know you'd be home so early." "My meeting with your father ended sooner than expected," I replied, studying his face. "Is everything okay?" Ethan glanced over his shoulder at the nearly closed door. "Ms. Caldwell showed up about 20 minutes ago. Said she needed to talk to you about Dad. I told her you weren't home, but she insisted on waiting." I felt a surge of protective anger. How dare this woman intrude on our home, confronting my teenage son when I wasn't present? "Ethan, go to the Wilsons' house next door. I'll text you when she's gone." "Mom, I'm not leaving you alone with her." "It's fine," I assured him, squeezing his shoulder. "This is between adults. I'll handle it." Reluctantly, Ethan nodded and headed down the front walk toward our neighbor's house. Once he was safely away, I took a deep breath and entered my home. Adrienne Caldwell stood in the center of our living room, examining a framed family photo from a vacation in Maine 3 years earlier. She was exactly as I remembered from company functions: tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless poise that comes from generations of privilege. Her charcoal pantsuit probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She turned as I entered, setting down the photo with deliberate care. "Olivia, thank you for seeing me. I apologize for arriving unannounced." "This is unexpected," I said neutrally, setting my purse on a side table but remaining standing. "Ethan mentioned you wanted to discuss Nathan?" "Yes." Adrienne smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her sleeve. "I understand you met with him today regarding the divorce settlement." The audacity of her statement momentarily left me speechless. "I don't mean to be rude, Adrienne, but my divorce negotiations with my husband are not something I'll be discussing with you." "I'm not here to meddle," she said quickly. "I'm here as Nathan's partner, yes, but also as the marketing director for Mitchell Development. The waterfront project is at a critical stage, and the uncertainty surrounding the property sale is creating complications with our investors. So this is a business visit? Should I be billing you for consultation time?" The sarcasm slipped out before I could stop it. Adrienne's professional smile never wavered. "I understand your hostility, Olivia. In your position, I'd likely feel the same. But this project represents years of Nathan's work that began long before our relationship. I'm well aware of the timeline of my husband's various projects." I moved to the armchair nearest the front door, a clear signal that this visit would be brief. "What exactly do you want from me, Adrienne?" She remained standing, her posture perfect. "Nathan's latest offer is exceptionally generous. $500,000 plus a significant percentage of the house sale. That's far more than most divorce settlements after 15 years of marriage, especially considering—" "You haven't worked outside the home," my temper flared. "First, my renovation of this house was work. Valuable work that increased its worth considerably. Second, my lack of formal employment was a mutual decision that benefited Nathan's career. And third, I'm well aware of what constitutes a fair settlement in Connecticut, where marital assets are divided equitably regardless of whose name is on the deed." Adrienne had the grace to look slightly discomfited by my response. "I didn't mean to minimize your contributions. The house is beautiful. Your design sense is evident in every room." "Thank you," I said stiffly. "But that doesn't explain why you're here," she sighed, finally taking a seat on the edge of the sofa. "The waterfront project isn't just important to Nathan. It's important to the entire community. It will create jobs, revitalize a neglected area, bring in tax revenue for schools and public services. Delaying it over what is essentially a personal dispute seems short-sighted." "A personal dispute?" I repeated incredulously. "Nathan is trying to sell our family home out from under us with barely 2 weeks' notice. Ethan has lived here since he was 2 years old. This isn't a dispute. It's my husband discarding his family for a business opportunity and expecting us to simply accept it." "I understand it feels personal." It is personal, I interrupted. Just as personal as you dating my husband while he was still living here, pretending everything was normal. A flash of genuine emotion, discomfort, possibly even shame, crossed Adrian's perfect features before she regained control. My relationship with Nathan began after he had already decided to end your marriage. I wasn't the cause of your separation. Whether this was true or not, I couldn't say, nor did it particularly matter at this point. The end result was the same. Regardless, I said, my decision about the house isn't about punishing Nathan or sabotaging his project. It's about protecting my son's home and securing what's rightfully ours after 15 years of marriage. Adrian leaned forward, her expression earnest. What if there was a compromise? A way for everyone to get what they need? I'm listening. Nathan could secure alternate financing for the waterfront project. It would be more complex and potentially more expensive, but not impossible. In exchange, you would agree to sell the house after Ethan graduates high school in 3 years, allowing Nathan to recoup his investment then. I considered her proposal. It wasn't without merit. Ethan would have stability through high school, and I would have time to build my career and find a suitable alternative home. But there was a fundamental flaw in the plan. The house isn't just Nathan's investment to recoup, I pointed out. It's a shared marital asset, one that I've contributed to significantly, and according to the family trust, I may have lifetime residence rights regardless of our divorce. Adrian's expression shifted subtly. She clearly hadn't known about the trust provisions. I was under the impression the house was purchased with Nathan's funds and is solely in his name. The deed is in his name, yes, but the purchase was made primarily with Mitchell family trust funds, which means it's subject to trust provisions that protect it from being sold without consent of family members who have resided there for 10 years or more. Nathan's grandfather was quite specific about protecting family homes from being liquidated for business ventures. Adrian absorbed this information with remarkable composure, though I could see her rapidly recalculating. I see. Nathan didn't mention those details. I'm not surprised. He seems to have a selective memory regarding the trust provisions. We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us shifting from personal animosity to something more complex. A recognition, perhaps, that we were both dealing with aspects of Nathan's character that were less than admirable. May I ask you something, Olivia? Adrian said finally. Something personal? I hesitated, then nodded. Did you know? About the waterfront project, I mean, before the divorce announcement. The question surprised me. Only vaguely. Nathan mentioned he was working on a major development, but he kept the details private. He often did with his work. Adrian nodded slowly. He compartmentalizes. Work, family, personal relationships, all in separate boxes that never touch. I thought it was just his management style at first, but it's more fundamental than that. For the first time, I felt a flicker of sympathy for this woman. Was she beginning to see in Nathan the same character traits that had gradually eroded our marriage? The emotional distance, the secretiveness, the calculated charm that concealed a deeply self-serving nature? Why are you really here, Adrienne? I asked quietly. It can't just be about the financing for the waterfront project. She met my gaze directly for the first time. Nathan was different after his meeting with you today. Angry, yes, but also something else. Rattled, maybe. I've never seen him like that. It made me wonder if I'm missing pieces of this situation that might be important for me to understand. The honesty of her response caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps even hostility, but not this hint of vulnerability. Nathan doesn't like losing control, I said carefully, and he's not accustomed to being challenged, especially by people he assumes he can easily manage, like his academic uncle or his homemaker wife. But the trust provisions give you leverage. They do. Significant leverage. Adrian stood, smoothing her immaculate suit. I should go. Thank you for speaking with me, Olivia. I know this couldn't have been easy. I walked her to the door, uncertain how to end this strange encounter. At the threshold, Adrienne paused. One more thing, she said. The Hartwick investor dinner next Friday. Nathan's scheduled to present the waterfront project plans. He's counting on making a strong impression. Why are you telling me this? Because the dinner coincides with Ethan's debate competition finals at Westbrook Academy. I overheard Nathan telling his assistant to send regrets to the school. The information stung, though it shouldn't have surprised me. Nathan had always prioritized business over Ethan's activities. Thank you for telling me, I said, genuinely appreciative despite the circumstances. Adrienne nodded once, then walked to her car without looking back. I watched until her Mercedes disappeared down our tree-lined street, trying to process the unexpected conversation. What had she hoped to gain? Information about the trust provisions, certainly, but her parting revelation about Ethan's debate competition suggested something more complex than simple corporate espionage. I texted Ethan that it was safe to come home, then called Eleanor to update her on both my meeting with Nathan and the unexpected visit from Adrienne. Fascinating, Eleanor said when I'd finished. She's gathering intelligence, obviously, but the comment about Ethan's debate competition is interesting. Almost like she's trying to establish some kind of connection with you. Or drive a deeper wedge between Ethan and his father, I suggested. Possibly. Either way, be cautious about any further interactions with her. And regarding Nathan's settlement offer, we should discuss it in detail. But my initial reaction is that it's still inadequate given the trust provisions and your contributions to the property value. After we hung up, I sat in the library, my favorite room in the house, the one I'd spent countless hours restoring to its original grandeur. The afternoon sun streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the antique Persian rug. This was our home, mine and Ethan's, and I was more determined than ever to protect it. When Ethan returned, he was full of questions about Adrienne's visit. I shared an edited version, emphasizing that it had been civil but unproductive. Did she try to convince you to take Dad's offer? He asked, perceptive as always. She did, but she didn't know about the trust provisions. I think she was surprised to learn the house wasn't entirely Nathan's to sell. Ethan considered this. Do you think she'll tell Dad what you told her? Probably. But he already knows we've spoken with Edward and understand the trust protections. Now, it's not new information to him. Ethan ran his finger along the spines of the books on the nearest shelf. First editions that Nathan had purchased more for their investment value than for reading. Mom, if we win, if we get to keep the house, what happens to Dad's waterfront project? The question revealed Ethan's fundamental goodness. Despite everything, he still cared about his father's work, his dreams. The project will still happen, I assured him. Nathan will find alternative financing. It might be more complicated or expensive for him, but the development is too important to fail over one funding source. Ethan nodded, relieved. Good, because even though I'm mad at him, I know how much work he's put into it. He's been talking about revitalizing the waterfront since I was like 9. Your capacity for empathy amazes me, I said, hugging him briefly. But remember, this situation is Nathan's choice, not ours. We're just protecting what belongs to us. I know. He hesitated, then added, Adrienne told me about my debate finals, that Dad's missing it for some investor dinner. So she'd shared that information with Ethan too. Interesting. Are you disappointed? Ethan shrugged, aiming for nonchalance but not quite achieving it. Not really. He's missed most of the other competitions anyway. But I could see it still hurt, despite his attempt to pretend otherwise. I'll be there, I promised. Front row. With embarrassingly enthusiastic applause. That earned me a reluctant smile. Just don't make those weird whistling noises like you did at graduation. No promises. We ordered pizza for dinner, a small rebellion against Nathan's health-conscious meal planning, and ate in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, another break from Nathan's rigid house rules. As we talked about Ethan's day at school and my design consultation in New Canaan, I realized how much more relaxed our home felt without Nathan's constant critiques and corrections. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone upstairs to finish his homework, I received an unexpected email from Edward Mitchell. The subject line read simply, "Additional trust information." The email contained several scanned pages from Harold Mitchell's personal journals, with certain passages highlighted. Edward had added a brief note. "Found these while searching for additional documentation. Thought you might find my father's private thoughts illuminating." The highlighted passages were eye-opening. Harold had written extensively about his intentions for the family trust, particularly regarding the Watson mansion. One entry from 1972 was especially relevant. "Purchased the Watson property today. A magnificent structure despite its current disrepair. Not necessarily. I can handle the hearing. I'm fully prepared with all the documentation. Edward will be there as well to testify about his role as trustee. Your presence would strengthen our case, but it's not absolutely essential for this particular hearing." Relief washed over me. "Are you sure? This seems like a critical moment in the case." "It is critical, but so is being there for Ethan. Trust me to handle the legal front today. You focus on being a parent." After ending the call, I texted Edward to thank him for appearing at the hearing and to apologize for my absence. His response was immediate and understanding. "Family first. Always. That's exactly what my father would have wanted. Don't worry about the hearing. We have truth and documentation on our side." With that weight lifted, I turned my attention to preparing for Ethan's competition. I was just about to leave when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Olivia Mitchell?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, this is she. This is Patricia Hartwick. My husband Gerald and I are hosting the investor dinner for the waterfront project tonight." I froze, unsure why the hostess of Nathan's important business dinner would be calling me. "Yes, Mrs. Hartwick. How can I help you?" "Please, call me Patty. I'm actually calling about your son's debate competition at Westbrook today. My niece Madeline is on the debate team as well. She mentioned Ethan is competing in the finals." "That's right," I confirmed, still confused about the purpose of the call. Well, when I realized the conflict with our dinner, I was mortified. Nathan is supposed to present the project plans to our investors, but a father should be able to watch his son compete. It's these moments we can never get back, don't you think? "I completely agree," I said cautiously. "So I've rearranged our schedule," Patty continued cheerfully. "The dinner will now start at 7 instead of 5, giving Nathan plenty of time to attend Ethan's competition and still make it for his presentation. I've already informed his office of the change." I was momentarily speechless. This woman, a complete stranger, had rearranged an important business dinner solely to allow Nathan to attend his son's debate competition. It was an extraordinary gesture of kindness. "Mrs. Hartwick, Patty, that's incredibly thoughtful of you. I don't know what to say." "Oh, it was nothing, really. Family should come first, especially for these milestone moments in our children's lives. My Gerald missed our son's state championship baseball game 15 years ago for a business meeting, and he still regrets it. Some things can't be rescheduled, you know?" After thanking her profusely, I hung up and immediately texted Ethan. "Possible your dad might make it to the competition after all. Don't get your hopes up too much, but there's been a schedule change." His response was typically teenage in its brevity. "Cool, the EX." The neutral words couldn't hide the undercurrent of hope. Despite everything, Ethan still wanted his father's approval, his presence, his pride. I only hoped Nathan wouldn't disappoint him again. Westbrook Academy was bustling with activity when I arrived shortly before noon. The debate finals were a significant event, with teams from 8 prestigious private schools competing. I found a seat near the front as promised, and waited anxiously for Ethan's team to take the stage. When Riverdale Prep was announced, I spotted Ethan immediately, looking composed and professional as he arranged his notes at the podium. The topic, balancing economic development with environmental protection, seemed almost too perfect given our family circumstances. Ethan was arguing the pro-environmental side naturally. As the debate began, I became so engrossed in Ethan's poised, articulate arguments that I almost missed Nathan slipping into the auditorium. He stood at the back briefly before finding a seat several rows behind me. Our eyes met momentarily, his expression unreadable, before we both returned our attention to the stage. Ethan was magnificent. His command of the facts, his logical progression of arguments, his respectful but firm rebuttals of the opposing team's points, all demonstrated a maturity beyond his 14 years. When he delivered his closing statement, connecting coastal development regulations to the preservation of natural heritage for future generations, I wasn't the only parent dabbing at my eyes. The judges' deliberation seemed to take forever, but when they finally announced Riverdale Prep as the winners, the audience erupted in applause. I cheered loudly, without whistling, my heart swelling with pride as Ethan accepted the trophy with his teammates, his smile wide and genuine. After the ceremony, families gathered in the school lobby for refreshments. I hung back slightly, giving Ethan space to celebrate with his friends. To my surprise, Nathan approached, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the casual setting of juice and cookies. "He was impressive," Nathan said, his tone formal but sincere. "Yes, he was," I agreed. "I'm glad you could make it." The Hartwicks rescheduled the dinner. Patty's niece is on the Westbrook team, apparently. I nodded, deciding not to reveal that I already knew about the rescheduling. "Ethan will be happy you're here. He tries to pretend it doesn't matter, but it does." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "I know. He hesitated, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "I've missed too many of these events." Before I could respond, Ethan spotted us and made his way over, his expression cautiously pleased to see his father there. "You came," he said to Nathan, trying to sound casual despite the obvious happiness in his voice. "Of course," Nathan replied, as if he hadn't missed dozens of similar events over the years. "Your arguments were excellent." That point about intergenerational environmental responsibility was particularly well articulated. Ethan beamed under the specific praise. "Thanks, Dad. I've been working on that section for weeks. Mrs. Perkins thought it might be too philosophical, but I felt it needed that broader context." "You were right," Nathan said, and for a moment I glimpsed the father he could have been, attentive, encouraging, genuinely invested in Ethan's interests and achievements. The three of us stood there, in awkward silence for a moment, a fractured family in a sea of intact ones, until Nathan checked his watch. "I should get going. The dinner." "Right, yeah," Ethan said quickly. "Thanks for coming, Dad." Nathan hesitated, then did something so unexpected it momentarily stunned both Ethan and me. He hugged his son. It was brief and slightly stiff, but it was genuine. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly before pulling away. As Nathan left, Ethan turned to me with wide eyes. "Did that actually just happen?" "It did," I confirmed, equally surprised. "That was nice." "Yeah," Ethan agreed, a complicated mix of emotions crossing his face. "It was." The moment of family harmony was short-lived. When we arrived home, I found an urgent voicemail from Eleanor about the hearing. I called her back immediately, stepping into the library for privacy while Ethan went upstairs to change. "How did it go?" I asked without preamble. "Mixed results," Eleanor replied, her tone carefully measured. "The judge didn't invalidate Edward's authority as trustee, which is good, But he's ordered a full evidentiary hearing on the trust provisions, specifically regarding the Mitchell Women Clause and your residence rights. When? Monday morning. Both you and Nathan will need to testify, as will Edward. The judge wants to hear detailed arguments about the intent behind the trust language. I processed this information, trying to determine if it was good or bad news. What does this mean for our position? It means the judge is taking the trust provisions seriously, which is positive. But Nathan's lawyers made some compelling technical arguments about the modern application of outdated trust language. They're essentially arguing that while Harold Mitchell may have intended to protect family homes, that protection shouldn't extend to ex-spouses in a way that prevents the property from being used for significant family business opportunities. But I'm still legally Nathan's wife, not his ex-spouse. And even after the divorce, the Mitchell women provision should apply since I've lived here more than 10 years, and I'm Ethan's mother. Exactly our argument, Eleanor confirmed. But the judge wants to hear evidence about Harold's specific intentions. Edward's testimony was very helpful today, the journal entries particularly so. But Nathan's team is bringing in a trust expert, who's going to argue that the provisions should be interpreted narrowly in light of modern circumstances. I sighed, leaning against the library desk. So Monday is crucial. Very. We need to be fully prepared. Can you come to my office tomorrow afternoon to prep for your testimony? I agreed. And after hanging up, I stood for a moment looking around the library, the heart of our home, the room I'd poured the most love and craftsmanship into restoring. The thought that its fate and ours hinged on a judge's interpretation of decades-old trust language was both terrifying and surreal. Ethan appeared in the doorway, now changed into jeans and a t-shirt, his debate formality shed. "Everything okay, Mom? You look worried." I considered downplaying the situation but opted for honesty. Big hearing on Monday about the house and the trust provisions. Eleanor thinks it could be decisive. Ethan nodded solemnly. Is there anything I can do to help? Just keep being your amazing self, I told him. And maybe be prepared for some more legal ups and downs in the coming days. I could testify, he offered suddenly, about what great-grandfather Harold's house means to me, about wanting to stay here. The offer touched me deeply, but I shook my head. I appreciate that, Ethan, truly. But I don't want to put you in that position. This fight is between your father and me. You shouldn't have to take sides in a courtroom. But it's not just between you and Dad, he insisted. It's about our home, my home too. I studied my son's determined expression, so similar to the one he'd worn during his debate performance. Let me talk to Eleanor about it. If she thinks your testimony would help and could be done in a way that doesn't put you in the middle, we'll consider it. Okay? He seemed satisfied with this compromise. Okay. But I want to help. I'm not just a kid who doesn't understand what's happening. I know you're not, I assured him. You've been more mature about this whole situation than many adults would be. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Saturday afternoon I spent with Eleanor, practicing my testimony and anticipating hostile questions from Nathan's lawyers. Sunday was dedicated to my design work. The consultation with Sophia's art collector client had gone well, and I needed to prepare initial concept boards for a follow-up meeting. Keeping busy helped manage my anxiety about Monday's hearing. But by Sunday evening, the stress had become almost unbearable. I was sitting in the library, reviewing the trust documents one more time, when the doorbell rang. Assuming it was Eleanor with last-minute preparation materials, I was shocked to find Adrienne Caldwell on my doorstep again. Unlike her previous visit, she looked distinctly less polished. Her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her designer clothes replaced by jeans and a silk blouse. I apologize for coming by unannounced again, she said, her usual confidence, noticeably dimmed. I wouldn't have, but I think there's something you should know before tomorrow's hearing. Intrigued despite my better judgment, I invited her in. We sat in the living room rather than the more intimate library, maintaining a careful distance between us. "How was the investor dinner?" I asked, more to break the ice than from genuine interest. "Successful," she replied automatically. "The Hardwicks are fully committed to the project, along with 3 other major investors." She paused, then added, "Nathan mentioned he attended Ethan's debate competition, said the team won." "They did. Ethan was brilliant." Adrian nodded, then seemed to steel herself. "Olivia, there's no delicate way to put this. Nathan is planning to present fraudulent evidence at tomorrow's hearing." The blunt statement hung in the air between us. "What kind of fraudulent evidence?" I finally asked. "Altered trust documents. His legal team has created versions with subtle modifications to the language about residence rights. The changes are small but significant, enough to undermine your claim if the originals aren't available for direct comparison." My mind raced with implications. "Why are you telling me this?" Adrian looked down at her hands. "Because it crosses a line. Business is business, and divorce is complicated. But deliberate fraud in a court proceeding is criminal." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "And because when Nathan showed me the strategy, he laughed about how you'd never notice the differences since you've never understood legal language anyway." That level of condescension and dishonesty, it made me see things more clearly. I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. "This could be a trap. You telling me this so I'll make accusations in court that make me look paranoid and vindictive when they can't be proven." "A reasonable suspicion," she acknowledged, "which is why I brought this." She removed a flash drive from her purse. "It contains emails between Nathan and his legal team discussing the document alterations, plus PDF comparisons showing the changes. I also included screenshots of the original trust documents from Nathan's secure server, which should match the official versions Edward has." I took the flash drive, still suspicious. "Why would you do this? You're risking your relationship with Nathan, possibly even your job." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "The waterfront project is important to me professionally. I've worked on the marketing and community engagement for over a year. But my professional reputation is built on integrity. If Nathan is willing to commit fraud over this, what other ethical lines might he cross in the business? Lines that could implicate me?" Her explanation made sense, but I sensed there was more she wasn't saying. And personally, a flash of something, pain perhaps, or resignation crossed her face. "Let's just say that seeing how Nathan treats you has been illuminating. Some patterns tend to repeat." Understanding dawned. Nathan's dismissive attitude, his emotional withholding, his manipulative tactics, Adrian was beginning to experience them herself. "Thank you for this," I said, holding up the flash drive. "I'll have Eleanor review it immediately." Adrian stood to leave. "I should go. If Nathan discovers I've done this, he won't hear it from me," I assured her. At the door, she paused. "Olivia, for what it's worth, I am sorry about how this has affected you and Ethan. Whatever Nathan may have told me about your marriage, it's clear you didn't deserve this." After she left, I called Eleanor immediately, explaining the unexpected visit and the alleged fraudulent documents. She agreed to meet me at her office within the hour to review the evidence. The flash drive contained exactly what Adrian had claimed: damning emails discussing strategic modifications to the trust language, plus side-by-side comparisons showing the original text and the altered versions. The changes were indeed subtle but significant. Lifetime residence rights became temporary residence accommodation, shall not be abridged by divorce or separation became shall be considered in divorce settlements, and other similarly crucial alterations. Eleanor was incensed. "This is outright fraud. Presenting falsified documents to the court could result in sanctions, possible disbarment for the attorneys involved, and criminal charges." Are we certain these emails are authentic? I asked, still wary of a potential trap. They have all the technical markers of authenticity, proper headers, consistent metadata, and the writing style matches what I've seen from Nathan's legal team in other correspondence. Eleanor tapped her pen against her desk decisively. I'm calling Edward right now to verify the original trust language from his copies. Edward confirmed that the original versions shown in Adrian's files matched his official trustee copies exactly. The evidence of planned fraud was overwhelming. So, what do we do? I asked. Confront Nathan before the hearing? Report this to the judge immediately? Eleanor considered the options carefully. I think we wait. We let them present their fraudulent evidence first, then introduce the authentic documents along with the emails showing deliberate intent to deceive the court. The impact will be much greater that way. Isn't that risky? What if the judge believes their versions? Trust me, Eleanor said, her eyes gleaming with the fire of a lawyer who's caught an opponent in a fatal error. Once we present the evidence of document tampering, nothing else they say will have any credibility. This kind of fraud is a nuclear option. It destroys everything in its blast radius, including any legitimate arguments they might have had. The next morning, I dressed carefully for court in a conservative navy suit, my hands shaking slightly as I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings. A small talisman of strength from a woman who had faced her own difficulties with grace. Ethan was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, dressed for school but clearly anxious about the hearing. You look nice, Mom. Very official. That's the goal, I said, attempting a confident smile. Professional, but not overly formal. You're going to win, he stated with touching certainty. The trust is on our side. Great-grandfather Harold is on our side. I squeezed his shoulder gently. I hope so. But whatever happens today will be okay. Remember that. I know. He hesitated, then added, I told Mrs. Perkins I might need to leave school early, depending on how things go. She said it was fine. Ethan, that's not necessary. The hearing could take all day and— Mom, he interrupted firmly, this is about our home. I should be there for the decision, whatever it is. Looking at his determined expression, I realized he was right. This affected his future as much as mine. Okay, I'll text you if it looks like the judge will rule today. But these things often get continued or taken under advisement, so don't be disappointed if there's no immediate resolution. Eleanor met me on the courthouse steps, looking battle-ready in a crisp charcoal suit, her silver hair gleaming in the morning sun. Ready for this? As I'll ever be. Inside, Nathan and his legal team, 3 attorneys from a prestigious Hartford firm, were already seated at the plaintiff's table. Nathan looked impeccable as always in a custom suit, his expression coldly professional. Our eyes met briefly as I took my seat, his gaze giving away nothing. Edward arrived moments later, distinguished and professorial in a tweed jacket with elbow patches. He nodded cordially to Nathan before joining us at the defense table, his calm presence reassuring. Judge Harriman entered, a stern-looking woman, in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. After the customary rise and be seated, she got straight to business. This is an evidentiary hearing regarding Mitchell versus Mitchell, specifically addressing trust provisions pertaining to the residential property at 47 Oakwood Drive, commonly known as the Watson Mansion. Mr. Geller, as counsel for the plaintiff, you may begin. Nathan's lead attorney, a silver-haired man with an air of patrician authority, approached the bench. Your Honor, this case hinges on the proper interpretation of trust language created nearly 50 years ago, in very different social and legal circumstances. We'll demonstrate that while Harold Mitchell's trust does contain provisions regarding family homes, those provisions were never intended to prevent legitimate business transactions or to grant perpetual residence rights to non-blood relatives following divorce. I watched as he smoothly presented their case, calling their trust expert to testify about evolving interpretations of family trust provisions. Nathan then took the stand, speaking eloquently about his grandfather's business acumen and how Harold would have surely supported the waterfront development as a significant family business opportunity. Then came the moment we'd been anticipating. Geller approached the bench with a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence the relevant sections of the Mitchell Family Trust, particularly those addressing residential properties and divorce contingencies." As the document was handed to the judge, Eleanor squeezed my hand under the table, our signal that the trap was about to be sprung. Judge Harriman reviewed the document carefully, then passed it to the court clerk for official marking. Geller proceeded to highlight specific passages, including the altered sections Adrienne had warned us about. "As you can see, Your Honor, the trust language suggests temporary accommodations be considered in divorce settlements, not permanent residence, rights that would effectively prevent the property from ever being sold." Eleanor rose smoothly. "Your Honor, may I approach the bench?" The judge nodded, and both attorneys conferred quietly at the bench for several minutes. Judge Harriman's expression shifted from neutral to concerned to something approaching anger. She finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "We'll take a 30-minute recess. I'd like to see both legal teams and the parties in my chambers immediately." As we filed into the judge's chambers, Nathan caught my eye, his expression questioning. I maintained a neutral facade, though inside I was vibrating with nervous energy. Judge Harriman wasted no time once her door was closed. "Ms. Davis has presented me with evidence suggesting the trust documents just submitted to this court have been altered from their original form. She also has emails indicating this alteration may have been deliberate. Mr. Geller, would you care to explain?" The blood drained from Nathan's face as he turned to his attorney, who appeared equally shocked. "Your Honor, I have no knowledge of any document alterations. The trust provisions we submitted were provided to us by our client as authentic." All eyes turned to Nathan, who maintained his composure despite the obvious tension. "I provided the documents my legal team requested. If there are discrepancies with Edward's versions, they may be due to different amendments or updates over the years." Edward spoke up, his academic authority adding weight to his words. "As trustee, I maintain the official, legally binding versions of all trust documents. The provisions regarding residence rights have never been amended since my father created the trust in 1972. The documents Ms. Davis has shown me match my official versions exactly. The documents submitted today do not." Judge Harriman's expression was thunderous. "I take allegations of document falsification extremely seriously. We will adjourn this hearing pending a full investigation into these documents. Mr. Geller, I suggest you personally verify the authenticity of all evidence before we reconvene." Back in the courtroom, the judge announced the adjournment to the few spectators present. As we gathered our materials, Nathan approached our table, his face tight with controlled fury. "What the hell did you do?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. "I didn't do anything, Nathan," I replied calmly. "But someone with access to your files was troubled enough by the planned fraud to make sure the truth came out." Realization dawned in his eyes. "Adrienne," he said flatly. I neither confirmed nor denied, gathering my purse and standing to leave. "You should be more careful about who you trust, Nathan, and about underestimating people you assume are under your control." Eleanor, Edward, and I walked out of the courthouse together, the unexpected adjournment leaving us in a strange limbo. Neither victory nor defeat, but a significant shift in momentum. "What happens now?" I asked Eleanor as we stood on the courthouse steps. "Nathan's legal team will investigate the document discrepancies. Once they confirm the alterations, which they will, they'll likely withdraw the fraudulent versions and either proceed with the authentic documents or seek a settlement to avoid further embarrassment. And if they claim they didn't know the documents were altered, that Nathan provided them that way?" Eleanor's smile was sharp. "Then Nathan has a much bigger problem. His attorneys won't take the fall for document fraud. They'll throw him under the bus to save themselves from potential disbarment." Edward nodded sagely. Either way, their position is severely compromised. My father would be pleased to see his careful drafting withstand this challenge. I texted Ethan the news, explaining that while there was no final decision, things had taken a dramatic turn in our favor. His response was immediate. Yes! Coming home now. Need details. That evening, as Ethan and I sat in the kitchen sharing leftover lasagna and a detailed recap of the day's events, my phone rang with Nathan's number. I hesitated before answering, putting it on speaker so Ethan could hear. Olivia, Nathan's voice was tightly controlled. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone, in person. Tomorrow morning at my office. I think we're past the point of private negotiations, Nathan. Anything you have to say can be said through our attorneys. This isn't about legal strategies anymore. He paused, and when he continued, his voice had lost some of its edge. It's about finding a solution that works for everyone, especially Ethan. I glanced at my son, who was listening intently. Fine, 10 o'clock tomorrow, but I'm bringing Eleanor. Fine, Nathan agreed, sounding weary rather than combative. I'll tell my team. After hanging up, Ethan looked at me thoughtfully. Dad? Sounded different, less, I don't know, arrogant? Nothing humbles quite like nearly getting caught committing fraud, I said dryly. Do you think he's going to give up? Let us keep the house? I wished I could offer certainty, but the truth was more complex. I don't know, Ethan, but his position is definitely weaker now, and ours is stronger. That's a good start. As I lay in bed that night, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. From devastated, blindsided wife to determined adversary fighting for our home, the transformation surprised even me. Whatever Nathan proposed tomorrow, I would evaluate it from a position of newfound strength, not desperation or fear. For the first time since this ordeal began, I slept soundly, without the anxiety that had become my constant companion. Whatever happened next, I had proven, to Nathan, to Ethan, and most importantly to myself, that I was not simply an accessory, to be discarded when inconvenient. I was a formidable opponent, worthy of respect and fair treatment. The Watson mansion wasn't just a house, it was the physical manifestation of years of my life, my work, my creativity. And thanks to Harold Mitchell's foresight, his journal entries, Edward's support, Eleanor's legal acumen, and even Adrian's unexpected intervention, I had a real chance of protecting it for myself and for Ethan. Tomorrow would bring another confrontation, perhaps even a resolution. But tonight, in the home I had poured my heart into, I finally felt peace. Nathan's office looked different somehow as Eleanor and I arrived the next morning. The same sleek furniture, the same impressive view, but the atmosphere had shifted. The receptionist avoided eye contact, and Nathan's assistant seemed unusually flustered as he escorted us to the conference room rather than Nathan's private office. Nathan was already seated at the head of the large table, flanked by just one attorney instead of his usual team of 3. Edward Mitchell sat opposite, his tweed jacket and calm demeanor an incongruous presence in the ultra-modern corporate space. The surprise of seeing him there must have shown on my face. I invited Uncle Edward, Nathan explained, his tone carefully neutral. As trustee, his input will be valuable in finding a workable solution. Eleanor and I took seats beside Edward. The atmosphere was tense but lacking the aggressive hostility of our previous encounters. Nathan looked tired, the confident facade showing cracks around the edges. Before we begin, Nathan's attorney said, I want to state for the record that our firm had no knowledge of any document alterations. We're conducting a thorough internal investigation to determine how this occurred. That's between you and the Bar Association, Eleanor replied coolly. We're here to discuss settlement terms, not document custody issues. Nathan cleared his throat. I've spent the night reviewing our options. The situation with the waterfront. Development is complicated. The investors are committed, But the timeline is creating significant pressure. He straightened a pen that was already perfectly aligned with his notepad. I'm prepared to offer a compromise that addresses everyone's interests. I remained silent, waiting. This was clearly rehearsed, and interrupting would only prolong the process. I propose the following. The house remains in my name, but you and Ethan have guaranteed residence rights until he graduates high school. At that point, we reassess. In return, you withdraw all claims based on the trust provisions, allowing me to use the property as collateral for alternative financing. Edward leaned forward slightly. And how does this address the trust requirements that the property remain a family home? Nathan shifted his attention to his uncle. The property would remain a family home. Olivia and Ethan would continue living there. I'm simply asking for the flexibility to leverage the asset value without an outright sale. For now, I noted skeptically. Yes, for now, Nathan admitted. I won't pretend my long-term preference hasn't changed, but this gives everyone breathing room. You and Ethan maintain stability during his high school years, and I secure the financing I need for the waterfront project. Eleanor tapped her pen thoughtfully. And the financial terms of the divorce settlement? $400,000 up front, plus $3,000 monthly for child support, and another $4,000 in alimony for 5 years, or until you remarry. Nathan's tone was businesslike, as if we were negotiating a corporate merger rather than the dissolution of our family. I glanced at Eleanor, who gave a small nod indicating the offer had merit, but wasn't yet ideal. Edward's expression remained inscrutable. What happens after Ethan graduates? I asked. That's less than 4 years away. We renegotiate based on circumstances at that time, Nathan replied. If the waterfront development is successful, as I expect it to be, I'd consider transferring full ownership of the house to you as a final settlement. The offer was better than anything he'd proposed previously, but the conditional language troubled me. Consider left too much room for manipulation later. That's not specific enough, I said firmly. I need guarantees, not possibilities. Nathan's jaw tightened momentarily before he controlled his expression. Fine. If the waterfront project achieves profitability benchmarks, which I'll define specifically in the agreement, I will transfer full ownership of the house to you when Ethan graduates high school or turns 18, whichever comes last. Edward nodded slightly, appearing satisfied with this modification. And if the project doesn't hit those benchmarks? Eleanor pressed. Then we sell the house and split the proceeds equally, Nathan conceded. But I maintain exclusive right to purchase your share at fair market value if I choose. The conversation continued for another hour, refining details, clarifying terms, addressing contingencies. Throughout the negotiation, I was struck by Nathan's business-like approach. Efficient, pragmatic, devoid of the emotional manipulation he'd employed in our earlier discussions. Whether this represented personal growth or merely tactical adaptation, I couldn't tell. As we neared agreement on the major points, Edward raised his hand slightly. There's one more matter we should address, the document alteration issue. Nathan's attorney tensed visibly. As I stated earlier, I'm not interested in placing blame, Edward interrupted gently. My concern is ensuring this agreement is honored in both letter and spirit. Given recent events, I believe additional safeguards are appropriate. He withdrew a folder from his briefcase. I've drafted an addendum to the trust. It explicitly names Olivia as a protected beneficiary regarding the Watson mansion, regardless of marital status. It also appoints an independent co-trustee, Judge Martinez, retired from family court, to oversee any future transactions involving trust properties. Nathan frowned. That seems excessive. It seems prudent, Edward corrected mildly. Trust, once broken, requires structural reinforcement to rebuild. This protects everyone, including you, Nathan. No one can later claim undue influence or improper procedures if an independent trustee has approved all transactions. After some additional negotiation, Nathan reluctantly agreed to Edward's addendum. As the meeting concluded, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that we'd found a workable solution, lingering anger over Nathan's earlier tactics, and cautious optimism about securing our home long-term. Outside in the hallway, Eleanor squeezed my arm encouragingly. That went better than expected. Nathan clearly wants to avoid further scandal or court proceedings. Edward nodded agreement. The document fraud attempt was a blessing in disguise. It gave us leverage we might not otherwise have had. As they continued discussing legal details, I noticed Nathan standing alone at the window of his office, silhouetted against the city skyline. On impulse, I excused myself and knocked lightly on his open door. "May I come in?" He turned, surprise briefly crossing his features before the professional mask returned. "Of course." I entered but remained near the doorway. I wanted to say, "Thank you for being reasonable today. This solution is better for everyone, especially Ethan." Nathan nodded, his expression unreadable. "It was never my intention to hurt Ethan. Or you, for that matter. The timing was unfortunate." "The timing wasn't the problem, Nathan. It was the deception. The dismissal of 15 years together as something to be settled with a check and a 2-week notice." He had the grace to look somewhat ashamed. "I handled it poorly. The waterfront opportunity came together faster than expected, and I compartmentalized." "You've always been good at that," I observed without rancor. "Work in one box, family in another, never letting them touch." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Adrienne resigned this morning," he said finally, "effective immediately." I maintained a neutral expression, though the news surprised me. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" His tone held a hint of the old Nathan, sharp, slightly accusatory. "Yes, actually. She's talented. The project will suffer without her." I paused, then added, "Did she say why?" "Ethical concerns about leadership," he quoted with a grimace. "She was quite specific about certain behaviors she couldn't condone professionally." I chose my next words carefully. "Perhaps that's something to reflect on, then." Nathan's gaze returned to the window, to the city he was reshaping through his developments. "Perhaps." The conversation seemed to have reached its natural conclusion, but as I turned to leave, Nathan spoke again. "The house, your renovations, they were extraordinary." The admission seemed difficult for him. I never properly acknowledged that. "No, you didn't," I agreed quietly. "The library especially. My grandfather would have loved what you did with it. He was fanatical about original details, historical accuracy." "I know." I read his journals. Nathan nodded, still looking out at the city. "Tell Ethan I'll call him this weekend. About college visits, maybe. Harvard has a strong debate program." "He'd like that," I said, surprised by the genuine effort. "Goodbye, Nathan." Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The settlement wasn't perfect, but it was fair. Fairer than anything I'd thought possible when this ordeal began. Most importantly, our home was secure, at least through Ethan's high school years, with a clear path to permanent ownership after that. Ethan was waiting anxiously when I arrived, having taken a half day from school to hear the news. "Well, what happened? Do we get to keep the house?" "Yes," I confirmed, smiling at his jubilant fist pump. "At least until you graduate, and most likely permanently after that. Your father agreed to very specific terms." I explained the settlement details while Ethan listened intently, asking occasional clarifying questions that reminded me of his debate preparation. "So Dad basically admitted he was wrong?" he asked hopefully. "Not in those exact words," I tempered his expectation. "But he's accepted a solution that acknowledges our rights to the house, and he mentioned calling you this. weekend about visiting colleges with strong debate programs. Ethan's expression brightened further. Really? That would be cool. It would, I agreed. One step at a time. That evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, I sat alone in the library, the heart of our home, the room that best represented my vision and work. The leather-bound first editions Nathan had collected gleamed in the soft lighting, but it was the space itself that held the most value to me. The meticulously restored Victorian woodwork, the period-appropriate paint colors researched through, historical records, the stained glass window I'd commissioned from a local artisan to replace the damaged original. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. Heard the news from Eleanor. Celebration dinner tomorrow? Bring Ethan. I smiled, typing. Back? Absolutely. He'll want to share his debate victory story anyway. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. Congratulations. The house was always meant to be yours. Adrienne. I considered how to respond, torn between gratitude for her crucial intervention and awareness of the complicated circumstances. Finally, I replied simply, thank you for everything. 3 months later, life had settled into a new rhythm. My design business was growing steadily. Sophia's art collector client had referred me to several friends, creating a niche specialty in displaying valuable collections within livable spaces. Ethan was thriving at school, his debate team success opening doors to prestigious summer programs. Nathan remained true to his word, maintaining a respectful distance while making genuine efforts to rebuild his relationship with Ethan through regular weekend activities and discussions about college plans. Our interactions were cordial, if somewhat formal, focused entirely on Ethan's needs and schedules. The waterfront development had broken ground with considerable fanfare. Nathan's financing hurdles apparently resolved through alternate means. I'd attended the groundbreaking ceremony with Ethan, standing at a respectful distance as Nathan charmed city officials and investors. Adrienne was notably absent, having apparently relocated to Boston for a position with a sustainable development firm. One crisp autumn afternoon, I arrived home to find Edward Mitchell waiting on our front porch, a leather portfolio under his arm. Edward, this is a pleasant surprise. I greeted him warmly, genuinely happy to see the man who had been such a crucial ally. I was in the neighborhood for a lecture at the Historical Society, he explained as I invited him in, and I wanted to deliver this in person. Inside the library, he handed me the portfolio. The final paperwork from the trust modifications. Everything's been filed and recorded officially. Your residence rights are now formally documented, independent of your marital status. Thank you, I said, feeling the weight of the documents, not just physically, but what they represented. Security, stability, recognition. Edward gazed around the library appreciatively. Harold would have been so pleased with what you've done here. He believed homes should be living history, not museums. Beautiful but functional, respecting the past while serving the present. That's exactly what I aimed for, I said, touched by his understanding. You know, Edward mused, running his hand along the restored oak shelving. My father kept journals for over 60 years. The ones introduced in court were just a fraction of his writings. I've been cataloging them for the Historical Society. That must be fascinating work. Indeed. I found some entries about this house, the Watson Mansion, from the final years of his life. He visited when Nathan first purchased it before your renovations began. What did he think? I asked, curious about Harold's initial impressions. Edward smiled, retrieving a small notebook from his jacket pocket. I thought you might want to hear his exact words. May I? I nodded, intrigued. Edward adjusted his reading glasses and read aloud. October 12, 1998. Visited the Watson Mansion today, now in Nathan's possession. The structure remains sound, though badly neglected by previous owners. Nathan speaks only of square footage and property values, but his young wife sees what matters: the soul of the place. She touched the scarred woodwork with such reverence, asked about original fixtures, inquired about historical photographs. She understands what Nathan does not, that a house of this significance isn't merely owned, it is held in trust for future generations. I believe she will be its true guardian, not my grandson. I felt tears welling in my eyes. He wrote that. After meeting me just once? Harold was an excellent judge of character, Edward said gently, closing the notebook. And it seems his judgment was vindicated. The house has found its rightful guardian, just as the trust has found its purpose. After Edward left, I sat alone in the gathering dusk of the library, Harold Mitchell's words echoing in my mind. Not merely owned, but held in trust. A guardian, not just an occupant. In fighting for this house, I had discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. The journey had been painful, filled with betrayal and challenges. But the outcome, this beautiful home secured for Ethan and me, my professional identity reclaimed and flourishing, made the struggle worthwhile. The mansion that Nathan had tried to sell out from under us had become, ironically, the foundation of our new independence. And Harold Mitchell, a man I'd barely known in life, had somehow foreseen it all, crafting trust language decades ago that would one day protect his family's legacy from his own grandson's ambition. I ran my hand along the polished wood of the desk, feeling the grain beneath my fingertips, connecting to all the hands that had touched it before mine, and all that would come after. Some battles are worth fighting, not just for what you gain, but for what you discover about yourself in the process. And some victories are sweetest when they honor not just your own needs, but the wisdom and foresight of those who came before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.